and welcome to On the House, the podcast where we talk about, well, whatever we want, be it movies, TV shows, or video games, because hey, it's On the House. Joining me as always is Lynette.
Hello.
Kiki.
Hey.
And Dave.
What's up?
And not joining us tonight is Matthew. Unfortunately, he had to go into work, but we'll catch him next time. So, I know you're all wondering what movie we're talking about for this first premiere episode. Unless, of course, you read the title. In which case, you already know. And I'm building all this up for nothing. Okay, it's Jaws. You got it out of me. It's Jaws, the classic film directed by Steven Spielberg, which had everything humanly possible go wrong during filming, and still turned out, well, that's what we'll talk about. First off, let's just go over everyone's familiarity with the series, and we'll go from there.
This is Kiki. My, repertoire with Jaws is today was the first day I ever watched it, and I've only seen the first one. Yeah.
We have a true version for this one.
This is Lynette. I grew up on Jaws, all of the Jawses actually. I used to watch them a lot as a kid, and I absolutely adored them. It's probably the reason why I've been fascinated with giant undersea creatures to this day, and I've seen it like a billion times, and I got through about half of it before we started this call, so.
Good deal.
I saw the first one, maybe when I was around 10-ish. I've also seen the second one in full, and I've seen bits and pieces of 3 and 4.
Well, trust me, with the quality of 3 and 4, bits and pieces are all you really need. As for myself, I've seen every single one of these movies multiple times. Probably some of these I shouldn't have seen multiple times, but hey, I didn't always make the smartest choices growing up. With that being said, we'll dive in. First thing I want to talk about is just everyone's general opinion on the film. Personally speaking, I think it's a absolute masterpiece in filmmaking. And this is a film that just totally changed the game. It's credited as creating the Hollywood blockbuster, and it still holds up with its suspense and all that stuff today. But what does everyone else think?
I mean, I think it is pretty amazing, especially considering how there's so many movies that came after it that tried to copy it. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Grizzly, but it's like literally the same movie as Jaws, but with a bear. There's just been so many different copies of Jaws, and also like a billion other shark movies, and I think that is just a testament to how amazing Jaws is as its own movie, is that it just spawned like a billion shark movies and also a billion remakes of Jaws with other animals.
Would it be controversial to say Jaws is probably the only shark movie that's worthwhile at all?
I mean, that's not controversial, I don't think.
I would say it's not one of my personal favorite horror films, but I get why it's beloved. Like, I get why so many scenes and quotes are iconic.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, and, like, the character of Brody in general is pretty iconic. Even more than Quint, which I realize is kind of an unpopular opinion. I guess Quint is sort of the fan favorite. Personally, I think Brody's better.
We all have our favorites. I personally love Richard Dreyfuss's character.
Oh, yes, I do like, Matt Hooper, I like him a lot. I like him better than Quint. He's still not better than Brody in my opinion.
So I am in the unpopular opinion that I didn't really care for the movie, but I can appreciate what they did for the movie, like with all the mechanics that go into that for that time. That was pretty mind-blowing. And no, I did like Richard Dreyfuss a lot.
Yeah, what's especially mind-blowing is literally every single problem that could happen while filming this movie could not work. Decided to film it in the actual open ocean. Well, unfortunately, that meant anytime a ship came by, they had to stop filming. And if you've ever been in the ocean, you know that it takes a long time for a ship to get out of the shot. So they went over budget. They went over the time that was allotted. Really, it's a miracle Steven Spielberg wasn't fired. Because
this is basically what happened with Waterworld 20 years later, but this went much more successfully.
Well, and also the Jaws, like the shark itself kept breaking down, and they couldn't get it to friggin' work. And they got it to work the one time, pretty much, for that one amazing shot where he takes out Quint, and that's pretty much it. Like, they could barely get the shark to work at all, so they could barely insert the shark into the movie.
Yeah, in fact, they actually had to come up with new ways to kind of show the shark because originally it was going to be you see the shark all the time. But because
Right,
it was
but they had to
constantly
use
not
that.
working, they needed to use like the yellow barrels or just the theme became so key to tell you the shark's around here. You just can't see it. And
Well, that's part of the reason why they did the whole camera as the shark thing too, right? Kind of like
Mhm.
Evil Dead does.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
Sorry, did you not hear what I said? Or
No, I thought Kiki was going to say something.
I was
Oh.
in agreement with the Evil Dead comparison.
Don't worry, folks. That's another movie we'll tackle here before too long.
Dave, you said that you didn't see, or you saw like bits and pieces of the sequels, but you didn't see, or what did you say earlier?
I saw 1 and 2 in full, and I saw bits and pieces of 3 and 4.
Actually, I gotta be honest, I'm actually a little bit curious, like, because this has been, like, I don't know, this has been on the tip of my tongue for this whole review, but, like, my favorite is Jaws 2. What's your opinion? Because I'm curious.
I gotta say that as a sequel, it does its job. Like, I know that sounds like an insult, but it's not as good as what came before, but so much better than what came after that. Like, it's a solid 7 out of 10 for me, and I can appreciate how the second one, it almost feels, in terms of structure, like almost like a slasher.
Oh yeah, I would totally
I
make
think
that
that's
argument.
what they were going for. Because then that's part of the reason why I like it was because, and and stop me if I go too long on the whole Jaws 2 thing, because I know we're supposed to be talking about the first one, but like I liked how they sent the kids out and they're trapped on this like structure made out of upturned boats, and they're all like traumatized and screaming and freaking out, and it is sort of like a slasher situation. And I also thought the way that Brody took out the shark at the very end was super creative too.
And definitely more realistic than what happens in the first movie, but hey, it's a movie. if it causes an explosion, we'll deal with it.
I almost have to wonder if, like, when I was a kid, I saw so many parodies of Jaws that by the time I saw the actual thing, like, I knew the general beats enough to it, like, it probably wouldn't have scared me as much.
Oh yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, there's such a thing as societal osmosis where, for example, I have never seen Gone with the Wind, but I know what happens in Gone with the Wind. It's just such a huge part of society.
Also super long, and you will fall asleep watching it.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Like, it's iconic, I mean, for a reason, but it's a marathon.
I had one major gripe with the movie, other than the general not too into it, was the soundtrack. Like, the music is good. I'm not saying the music is bad, but like in the scenes when they're chasing Jaws and they cut away from Jaws into the boat, it's like the super cheerful, like they're on vacation music. I'm like, I'm not feeling that too much.
Oh, really?
It needs to be a little more dreary. Yeah.
I mean, that kind of makes sense, because there are times when the movie jumps from like a really somber or threatening tone into a more cheerful one, but I guess maybe that's sort of the point, because because the whole thing about Jaws, right, is that it was one of those movies that made you realize that it's actually possible to be scared in the daytime. And so when you take something like happy music and summertime and playing and stuff like that, and you think, well, there's, underlying all of that, just beneath the surface of the water, there's a horrible threat. And so I think that's what they were trying to go for, the juxtaposition of like, hey, it's daylight and it's summertime and people should be happy, and it's like, yeah.
But then chasing the megalodon.
But it's also because a lot of the times, especially between Hooper and Brody, I think, not so much with Quint, but there's definitely a little bit of it, with the whole, guys just sort of bonding, and they have like a few chuckles here and there, but they're really, you can tell that they're wearied of this whole situation, and the mayor trying to hamstringing them. and their ability to stop all this. And so you can tell that they're just sort of trying to lighten the mood a little bit and like try to, sing songs or tell jokes. And it's like, hey, come on,
Well, like I get that, but it was like going from like the dun 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 to the like I was like, and there was no like transition into it. It was just bam, cut it. It's next.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Though, while we're speaking of the music, let's just talk about that iconic score. Because
Oh, yes.
even if you've never heard of Jaws, you know that score for any time somebody gets in the water. It's simple to do. In fact, it's so simple that Steven Spielberg, when he initially heard it, thought that John Williams was playing a joke on him. Because keep in mind, this is the man who's done Indiana Jones and Star Wars and all these epic films. You're expecting something grand, and yet he just makes it a simple dun. But the thing is, it's so effective. Sometimes less is truly more when it comes to music soundtracks.
Especially since, I mean, like you pointed out, like when you think John Williams, you think like grand orchestral, like symphonies type pieces, like very swelling and very successful and stuff like that. But then, you think of Jaws and you're just like, it's more like it's a subtle threat, which is exactly what you're trying to convey with the idea of the shark, is that it's something that's just beneath the surface of the water. It's something you don't see, but it's creeping up on you. And I think that's the perfect thing to go with. It definitely wouldn't have matched the sort of orchestral style that we usually associate John Williams with.
Mm-hmm. Well, while we're still on the subject, I mean, I know we got to move on to the sequels before too long, but there are two scenes in particular I want to talk about. The first is the opening scene with simply how iconic it is. I mean, it's probably one of the most parodied scenes in movies at this point, but the sheer terror that actress is able to convey on screen, and you never see the shark. You just see her getting dragged back and forth. I'm honestly surprised she didn't go on to have a better career, because that scene, the emotions she portrays in such a desperate situation, it gives me chills to this day.
Correct me if I'm wrong too, because you're more of the behind the scenes guy, and but there was two scuba guys who were dragging her around like back and forth, right? And
yeah,
the part where she's screaming, and you can sort of barely hear it. Like if you're watching the movie for the first time, you probably don't notice the words, but she says, "Guys, please stop." She's screaming. That was like her last thing before she gets dragged under, is, "Guys, please stop." And it's because the scuba guys were going in opposite directions and they were squishing her.
Yeah, what they did is they had ropes tied to her, and they would drag them in either direction to show the violent way that the shark is thrusting her back and forth. And that is actually a really good tidbit. I forgot about that, to tell you the truth.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's what I remember every time, because actually I find that almost more horrifying, like to realize that after the fact. Like it is definitely a horrifying scene on its own, but to realize that after the fact that these are real screams. Like after a while, like it ramps up into something that was actually genuinely real. She was genuinely in pain, and like that makes it more chilling, in my opinion.
No, yeah, I wasn't sure, because I heard that, but I was like, did she say, "God, please stop," or "Hey, please help me, I have passed out on the beach"?
That's what she said, because she was talking about the scuba guys.
Yeah.
Okay, like how far into the movie is the actual first look at the shark?
Oh, I think you briefly see it in where he attacks the boat that Brody's son is in.
Yeah, so when he's, like, I just saw that scene, like, literally, but, like, yeah, so in the pond, there's that guy who goes out in that little pram to go, the little pram boat to go, like, tell the kids, "Hey, guys, pull your sail in," and then, like, the shark comes up, and when it tips over the boat, you can see the shark coming up, like, sort of sideways underneath the water and grab the guy's leg. and pull him under. So that's like the first time you get sort of a glimpse of like the side of the shark's jaws. But like the real entrance onto the scene where the shark like really comes into play, like full faced, is when Brody is throwing chum in the water, and he's like, "Hey, yeah, come here, chum some of this shit," and then he gets the shark is just right there.
And he has such the iconic line right there, just the pure shock and terror and saying, "We're gonna need a bigger boat." The next scene I want to talk about is probably my favorite scene in the movie, and honestly one of my favorite scenes in films in general. It's the scene where they're all just sitting around and they start comparing scars and whatnot. Just, it's been a long day. They're all tense. They're trying to unwind a little bit. And then they start telling scars, but eventually somebody mentions a tattoo that Quint had removed. And it goes into this monologue of him being on the USS Indianapolis, and just that one scene tells you everything you ever need to know about why this character is the way he is.
I'll have to rewatch that.
So intense.
I can just appreciate there's, like, even though as much as the horror genre, seems a common complaint is that a lot of these movies just didn't develop characters, but these are the kind of moments that just help you appreciate things more.
Oh, exactly.
There was a lot of character development moments I noticed for Brody too, especially where like with him bonding with his family, that I thought really did add to the whole like flavor of the movie.
And
because
that's kind of why
there isn't enough characterization in horror movies.
That's kind of, there's often the mindset in horror films that they're just there to be killed. We don't need to like these people. We kind of are rooting for Freddy or Jason or whoever to kill them, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. You want to make characters that are likable. You want to make characters that the audience roots for, because then when they're being stalked, you don't want them to die. You're actively hoping that let this be the one character who survives the movie.
Well, and I take the other side of that also is the character development for the people that you want to be, killed by this creature or thing.
Sometimes they overdo it though, because sometimes they'll make a character too annoying, and then you're just I really want him to die.
Yeah, that was
there's that sweet middle ground that they miss a lot.
That was honestly my big issue with the Friday the 13th remake. Everyone was a jerk in that film.
I think it does depend on the type of horror that you're going for, with whether or not you want to build, a strong sense of empathy between the future victims and the audience or not. But I think it definitely does add something to Jaws, because in this particular instance, Jaws is just, or like the shark is just an animal. It's purely a large predator that's there to feed, and it doesn't really know any better. It's just there. It's not malicious. It's just eating. And so I think the characterization adds to it, because it's about the innocent people being caught up in some sort of a natural event.
Like, the shark has a presence, but it's not really a character.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, exactly. So, like, other movies, they'll have, slashers that have character, and that's important too. And so and sometimes it'll depend, what kind of horror movie it is. Whether you want to give more character moments to the killer or to the victims. But in this particular instance, I think it was they went the right direction in making the shark just a shark. Just a really big shark.
Indeed. Last thing I want to touch on before we move on is just the impact this movie had, because, like I said, this is credited as creating the Hollywood blockbuster. Prior to this, films were released on a very slow rollout system. It might open in one county here and then would open up on the next county as word of mouth spread, but this one knocked open the doors. It broke all kinds of records. In fact, I think adjusted for inflation, it would have been like the fourth highest grossing film of all time. Don't quote me on that exactly, but it's up there.
I totally thought that Wizard of Oz was the one that started that.
Wizard of Oz had a huge impact as well, but the way films came out, just the TV era kind of changed a lot of things.
Ah, I got you.
But in addition to creating the blockbuster, it also inspired several theme parks to open their rides based on them. And of course, we got several sequels, which we're going to start talking about right now.
Oh, good. Because something I wanted to mention when we were talking about the characterization of the shark and how it's supposed to be just a shark, they threw that out the window in Jaws Revenge.
Oh,
So
totally.
that was absolutely stupid, and I hate that movie. It's probably the only Jaws movie that I actually hate. I actually like Jaws 3. I know it's horrible, but you can appreciate it for what it is. But Jaws the Revenge is actually horrible.
Yeah.
Like, actually unfun to watch. And a big part of that reason is because instead of I guess there is a couple of people who haven't really seen it. Do you guys mind if I talk about the characterization of the shark in The Revenge?
You really think people are going to mind spoilers for this?
It's widely known as the worst film of all time, so I think you're good.
Well, and it's also, one of the reasons why you always have, blank the revenge at the end of it as some sort of a parody, because it really is a parody of itself in the sense that the shark isn't like a shark anymore. Now it's like the reincarnated ghost of the shark that Brody killed, and it's out for revenge, killing his family, and his entire family dies except for his wife, who kills it by stabbing it with the boat.
Which,
and it's really just, not only is it depressing because all of his children die, but it's just horrible because the whole point of Jaws was that it was just a big shark, and that was what was scary, is because of how real it was. And in the Revenge just ruined that.
I'll put it this way. Revenge's plot was so bad that when they wrote the book adaptation, they created a subplot that it was a voodoo curse put on the Brody family just to make it make more sense than what was in the movie. Which, when that's your fix for the problem, you messed up.
Worse. No explanation was better.
It's almost disturbing, though, how much recognizable names were in Jaws the Revenge.
Oh.
Michael Caine was in this.
Yeah, but when you're watching the film with him, you can tell about 20 minutes in, he realized, oh, it's that kind of movie, and stopped giving two shits. Another thing we have to touch on is, of course, the fact that the shark roars in that movie. It roars like a dinosaur.
Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that. You're right. Oh my freaking word.
I do want to say, though, since, with Jaws being, one of the first blockbusters, and the fact Jaws 2 was in 78, whenever people complain, oh, why are they nowadays all just doing sequels and focusing on established properties? That's what they were doing for decades. It is nothing new.
Oh, yeah, I mean, there's 28 Amityville horror movies, so this is not
how
new.
Many Children of the Corns there are.
I have no idea. How many are there?
There's over 8.
I legit thought there were maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, there's certain series that definitely get sequeled out to no end. I mean, the only Howling film that was any good was the first one, and I think they ended up making 7 or 8 there.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Halloween, there's technically 11 with the new one.
I mean,
come
to think of it, that is kind of more of a problem with horror movies than anything else.
Well, they just pushed back Bond 25, so...
Yeah.
And how many years has it been
Bond
now?
is a little bit different, though, because with Bond, you have, several different Bonds, and it's not entirely clear, there's not a clear timeline, really. And so it's, I don't know, it's kind of, Bond is more like a serial type thing than it is direct sequels most of the time.
Yeah.
There's so many franchises that I didn't even realize there was enough demand for sequels.
Well, the thing about horror movies is that it's so easy to make back your money on them, right? Because you can make them cheaply, and as long as you just get a slight shock out of audiences, then people will just go because.
Yeah, that's usually the problem. I do will say we've definitely been getting a more steady stream of horror movies in the past decade that are actually of quality. I mean, films like Get Out, the new
Us,
Halloween sequel. There's just been some great horror movies as of late.
Happy Death Day, It Follows, You're Next.
The only one of those that I saw was Get Out, and I wasn't terribly impressed, to be honest. But I do like some of the modern horror movies. Like, I don't know if As Above, So Below is considered really modern. I don't know what exactly. I think it was within the last decade, though.
Yeah,
But I really loved that movie. What?
That's just kind of modern as 2010s.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, we were talking about the past decade. I'm pretty sure it came out in the past decade. That one I did really love. So there are some like good modern horror movies, but definitely classics like Jaws. I don't think any of the movies that have come out recently are something that people are going to remember 70 years later as something truly amazing.
Well, I'm sure there'll be a few, but honestly, it takes decades to really know what's going to happen with the fandom of certain films. Like, for example, Twilight used to be everywhere, and now it's completely disappeared off the map.
Yeah, but it did spawn a whole genre, so despite how much everybody hates it, it did become iconic in the sort of infamous kind of way.
Yes, but even the genre it spawned disappeared, so it's kind of... Some things don't last as long as you think.
And I mean, like, after 4 tanked, they basically never did anything else with Jaws.
No, there were rumors of sequels, and there was one enjoyably bad video game, is the best way to put it.
Jaws Unleashed for the PlayStation 2?
Yeah.
I love that game. I mean, it is. I mean, I guess it's bad in the sense that I can't get past like the second level because I couldn't figure out how to get. But just the fact that you can just run around this giant shark and eat everything is what makes it so much fun. I love that game.
They based the level on the ride into like the Universal Studios game.
Wait, really? Which level was that?
I mean, there's like a Universal Studios game for I think GameCube, and I know they had like a one based on the Back to the Future ride. I think they had one for Jaws as well.
Oh yeah, I remember that game.
Oh my god.
Man, I need to go to Universal Studios. I want to go on the ride.
Yeah. Well, going back to the sequels, we touched on 2. Does anyone else have anything to say?
I mean, I think only 2 of us have seen Jaws 3, but that was my favorite as a kid because I loved the idea of the underwater water park, and just the idea of being able to walk underneath there. And I thought, like, even though the movie is truly bad, I think the concept of like the idea that there is that sort of constant threat surrounding you when you're trapped in a glass tube, and you're there to enjoy yourself and have fun and have vacation. Which is, a callback to, like, the other 2 movies where they're there to have fun and have vacation. The mayor doesn't want to stop anything that's going on. But, this time it's not that, there's a threat that's underneath the surface of that's just underneath the surface and you're, on the beach or close to the beach. It's more like you're all the way under the water. You're on the bottom of the ocean floor. And if something is to come after you now, you can't get away. And even though they didn't really do anything good with the concept, I really liked that.
I mean, I can appreciate that they realized that if Jaws is going to continue, like, you have to at least change the scenery, if nothing else.
Right, yeah,
and
definitely.
If I recall correctly, like, going into some backstory, wasn't this, like, supposed to... It started life as a parody, but then got turned into an actual entry?
That would make so much sense.
That would make sense. I know it was directed by a first-time director who never directed anything after, so that kind of tells you about the quality of the film. For example, there's a scene where the shark's just coming towards people, but it's not swimming. It's literally a still image of the shark moving closer, getting ready to attack.
And the clearly fake glass shatters into nowhere.
Oh yeah, the effects are
Oh, no.
terrible in that one.
It's great. Uh,
I have to see that.
I will
you
say,
really do. It's not. It's one of those so bad it's good movies.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a lot of fun to watch, and especially if you didn't like if Jaws the first one didn't do anything for you, you might really enjoy Jaws 3 just for the overall sort of schlockiness of it.
Oh yeah, I was hearing you guys talk about it. I'm like, I really gotta see that.
I will agree with Lynette that I absolutely love the premise of this movie. For me, it's very similar to Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where the premise is brilliant, but it didn't work because of the execution just wasn't there and possibly the wrong franchise for it. But the general idea, if some new director wants to rip it off and like have their own go at it, I'm totally on board for seeing that movie.
I mean, like, I'm a defender of the third Poltergeist just because I love the idea of putting ghosts in a Chicago skyscraper.
Yeah, I need to see that one. I know you're a big fan of it, and we've talked about it a bunch. I feel like I really need to see that one.
Like,
I'd
say, like, the negative reviews are like, it's not as bad as the reviews make it out to be.
Gotcha. And the only thing that I have to comment on Jaws 2, there's a deleted scene that I kind of wish made the film. So, in the first two movies, you see that the mayor's always kind of harassing, trying to get things open. Well, there's a scene where the city council is going to take a vote on whether or not to fire Brody. And what's cut is that in the actual vote, you saw everyone but the mayor vote to fire Brody. He stood up and actually was like, no, we didn't believe him last time. We need to believe him this time. But unfortunately, he's outvoted. And I get why they cut it due to the pacing, but I just thought that was a great character moment.
Yeah. Well, especially because I think it also matches up with because I mean, the characterization it follows through pretty well, but it's the same mayor, right? Like if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So in the first movie, there's the part where Brody is trying to convince him, like, look, because his kid's in shock in the hospital, and he's like, look, you need to solve this right now. We need to go to Quint. We need to pay him what he wants and get the shark out of here now. This is over. We're done. Like pussyfooting around, and the mayor is also kind of stammering and a little bit like doubting himself. And at one point, he turns to Brody and says, "Look, my kids were on that beach too." And I think it's like it speaks a lot to a little bit to his character. Like not that he's still not. I mean, he's still a douchebag, definitely. But it speaks a little bit to his character in the sense that he's a human being. He's not some caricature of a mayor who's just trying to get money for the summer. He does have a responsibility to the community, but after that actual attack that happened with his kids on the beach, it became abundantly clear to him that this is a real issue. So I think that follows that deleted scene would have given more credence to that scene in the first movie.
Yeah, for sure. Which you kind of reminded me of something in the actual book of Jaws. It's a very different property. Like the main characters, Richard Dreyfuss's character slept with Brody's wife, and there's also a subplot that the mob is wanting the beach open, which is why the mayor is constantly trying to keep it open. But for the movie, they streamlined it. They took all that complex stuff out because they knew that this is a movie about man versus nature. They knew if they started throwing more subplots in, it would just distract from the main story, and you wouldn't feel the tension when they actually go out on the boat.
Right. Well, and also because it would have made Hooper and Brody's wife significantly less sympathetic people, and I feel like a lot of an important part of that movie is the sympathy that you have for the people in the situation that they're in.
Mm-hmm. Like for example, Quint, when he's getting spoilers, bit by the shark, you can just see the look on his face, especially after the Indianapolis story, that this is his biggest fear. This is his hell, and he's living through it.
Which is kind of an interesting, Which is kind of interesting for a guy who picked a career as shark hunting. I mean, you see all those shark jaws in his cabin, in his sea cabin, and it's like, you wonder, like, man, how does a guy like that get into this? And it's like, well, because he was traumatized by that sort of thing at one point, and so now he can't think about anything else. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we wrap this up, does anyone else have any thoughts they want to say before we move on?
There was one thing I was trying to think. Mm-hmm. So I guess what you said proves like changing the book can be for the better sometimes, and like adaptations that do that aren't worse off inherently.
Oh yeah, totally agree with that sentiment. I mean, I could point out several books that, because books are just like movies or plays or anything else, they can have subplots that go nowhere. They can have too much extra fat on them.
If this Jaws is a case study, and considering the movie is so widely beloved, has it effectively overshadowed the book?
Yeah, it has at this point. Mostly because I think even the author of the book has come out and wanted to distance himself from it, so they were able to take a fairly book and turn it into a masterpiece, which is just a testament for the screenwriters and everyone on board.
Yeah.
Well, folks, we want to thank you for joining us on our first podcast ever. We hope you like it, and if you want, you can leave a like and comment below, or you don't have to. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. Before we go, I just want to say, if you're struggling with anything at all, know that there's help out there for you, and things will get better. I'm speaking as someone who's struggled with depression myself. Know that you are not alone. 1 in 4 adults suffer through mental health at some point in their life. And if you ever feel like you need to reach out for somebody, the Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. And with that being said, it's time to introduce which movie we're going to review next. So, Dave, take it away.
Well, I can tell you next time we do this, it's going to be something that involves cats, and it's very disturbing, and it's not the obvious one. You'll find out what it is next time.
And it ain't the Aristocats.
Blue.
So, join us next time to find out what that is, and thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.
Well.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.